It'll be 1 to go this time by. Coming to the green, buddy, coming to the green. Let's go get him. Go, 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 go.
Get your motor running. Head out on the highway.
It's not just this year that we're helping the teams. You know, it's every year there's something that is done that's small or under the radar. You know, 10 years ago, for safety or for cost.
Ultimately, throughout NASCAR, there are a lot of people working in a lot of areas, doing everything they possibly can to make sure our sport continues to succeed. Our fans, as we've said, are many times are the most loyal in sports, and we really appreciate that loyalty. They have come to expect the best racing in the world, and we're going to keep working with our team. This gets misunderstood whenever I say something like that, and it simply means that my father was 32 years the CEO or the president of NASCAR, ran the company. And all I've said is that you know, that's not in the cards for me, and I don't think it's a smart thing for the sport. That doesn't mean I won't have a long run. I hope I do. I hope I'm you know, doing what I'm doing. I really like what I'm doing, and I like working with the industry and a great group of people, and Mike and I side by side. So that should not be misconstrued. As long as we're having fun and we're making progress as an industry, that I would love doing what I'm doing. But I'm 46 now, so I don't think I'll be 76 and still talking to you. That's probably you know, that doesn't mean a short window, but it doesn't mean 30 years, and that's really where we are. We wanted the focus to be on what happens on the track, and every metrics that you look at, that's what was the predominant discussions that happened last year with our fans, and that's exactly what we want, as opposed to lawsuits and other crazy things or business elements that go on around the sport. So we feel like that was successful. And the 3 or 5 year down the road point for our teams is, you know, we've been in business over 60 years. So this is a business model and a sport that will endure. And yes, there's changing circumstances with an economy that we have not seen this difficult in a generation. And that is it's accelerating our efforts to take cost out of the system. You hear that from us frequently. Changes, incidentally, and lack thereof also help in the cost model. The more things that we have to change often cost money in the short run, so we're trying to hold the line on that as well. But the bottom line is, and the reality for us is, you know, we're not adapting something that will be effective for a year or two. We obviously, the new car and all the things that go around how we're set up, all look to many, many years down the road of having a stable, competitive, and safe motorsports organization that everybody can benefit from. When you read the stories like I do and understand what's going on, they're worried about their jobs, they're worried about, they're nervous. Many people have lost their jobs, and so and I think that's what you're seeing, the tracks trying to be sensitive to that. The NFL cut their playoff tickets, the pricing for those, trying to do everything they can, and we're trying to do everything we can, and the tracks are leading that charge, and they're just trying to be sensitive to their best customer. Well, we have very limited ways to influence that one way or the other. It is disappointing to see, you know, the traditional teams that have been with us, like the Petties or the Wood Brothers, since the beginning. But they haven't entirely gone away, of course, and it's reset in a different circumstances with the new team mergers. But that's the reality that we're going through, and you know, you're seeing the economy has spotlighted teams that were struggling mostly in performance on the track, and now that sponsorship is even more difficult to come by, it will spotlight those teams that in the last few years, for one reason or another, maybe no fault of their own, circumstances, bad luck or whatever, just simply haven't performed at the level that they need to. And that economic model is under a lot of pressure with sponsorship that is contracting.
Competition is good today as it's ever been as a whole. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the level of the current chassis has been reached yet. I think there's still cycles of opportunities for that to get better. And I think there's evidence in the 2008 season that there was a lot of advancement made from February through November at a lot of different places. And the more we leave that alone, and the more we allow the teams to, and the driver and the crew chief chemistry to apply itself to that car, the better that's going to get. But we do recognize and are proud of the fact that it's also a lifestyle of sorts. So when you talk about a Richard Petty or a Bud Moore or a Wood Brothers, then that's when the lifestyle kicks in, when your thought processes work through it. And Richard Petty is a huge brand to NASCAR, and it's part of our heritage. Whether or not Richard Petty is represented on the racetrack, either as a driver or as an owner, he will always be a big part of our heritage. And so will the others, a Bud Moore, Glenn Wood, Eddie Wood, Lenny Wood. They'll always be part of our heritage. But if you step back and looked at NASCAR as an industry, and think about it when you pick up a newspaper or see on television or hear on the radio the fact that somebody in another industry struggled and had to shut their brand of that industry down, whether it's in the electronic industry or the food industry or the beverage industry or whatever you might read, which we unfortunately pick up and read a lot about today. But when you step back and look at NASCAR as a business, as an industry, from time to time you have that happen in a business cycle. Along the way, what NASCAR has done in response to this, and this goes back to Brian's grandfather, and still exists today strongly in NASCAR, is for us to look at ways to offer up as much hope as we can. First of all, if I remember in Homestead, the question was, what about Daytona? And that's where my comment, no means no, was around Daytona, the question about whether or not they would be tested in Daytona. But no does mean no, but in context of what NASCAR has the ability to enforce its policy. And we have that ability with tracks that we have business relationships with. We don't have that ability at test facilities, proving grounds, tracks like Rockingham or College Station. We don't have that ability to enforce a policy. So that far reach that we would like to have is not enforceable, and we're not going to have a policy or a procedure or rule that we can't enforce fairly across the board. And that's a part of the basis of a policy that we come up with, is that everybody in the garage area has to feel like that it's fair to them. Now, we hear the same thing you hear. We know what's going on out there, but it's also a matter of us not being able to enforce that. And I think there's a consciousness among the teams that's deeper today than there was when we announced it back in November. Some of the owners, some of the drivers and crew chiefs, car chiefs that said, man, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. That didn't unfold the way they intended it might, or the way they were thinking about it at that time. But there's still some of it going on. But we believe that the suspension of testing that we announced in November for the 09 season has accomplished a lot and most of what we wanted it to accomplish. And that's number one, economically for car owners. It is a big impact. We're hearing things just in the month of January. I had a driver tell me his own personal expenses in January were down almost $200,000. I had a car owner tell us just in the month of January that their expenses were down almost $300,000 because of not testing. So then that's just in the month of January. So that means that that decision was a good decision to make. Even with the lack of the ability to define no meaning no as broadly as we might like to, I think we accomplished what we were looking for.